Welcome everyone to a little talk here on history. The talk will certainly be about European settlers within the park area. I will not mention the indigenous history, although we all know that they were here. My goal is to give you an idea of some of the family, especially one that was here in the park, and also what is left from those people today that you can go and explore without getting too far off the trail. But I will make the assumption in this that you are quite familiar, or at least a little bit familiar, with Frontenac Provincial Park. First, enjoy all sorts of activities within Frontenac Park, and it doesn't take long that if you keep your eyes open, you will see signs of human activities that probably were here at one time. Apparently, there was something like 16 farms, 19 shanties, log processing point, about 7 of them, 7 commercial mine sites, 6 personal mine sites, 18 cottages, 2 hunting camps, 1 lodge, even a temporary school, and others. So all of this was within what is today Frontenac Park. Now, I spent, I guess, sometimes when I was bored, to try to count how many farming family would be within the park at a certain time, logging operation and mining operation. And I try to make a graph that has nothing scientific on it. But one thing that I would like to point out is that on this line here, this is the year, and every little bit like this one here, that is one family, for example, or one operation. So the first family would probably have been here, some say as early as 1836, and that would be the Page family. But what is interesting is the peak. I like to see that if you were, for example, farming at this time, which is in the late-ish 1800, well, the logging operation was in decline within the park, but you would still be able to make money, I guess, logging. And the mining, mica mostly operation, was still pretty much at its peak. At the bottom here, we have like those would be cottages and campsite. And there's only one because George Kemp, apparently at the entrance where the office is, would allow people to camp. I don't think if he was charging, but he will allow that. So just this graph sort of gives you an idea of when the operation would be, or how many people would be here at a certain time. When was the peak of farming, logging, and mining? The last family to leave, this is that one here in the 50s. So there's one left after that. Not after that, but that's the last one to leave. Now on this side, I have sort of a map of Frontenac Park, and I have spent some time marking in yellow where the farms were, on which lot they were. Now, one thing to really point out is that Frontenac Park sits in 2 different townships. This is the line between the 2 townships. At the north end here, that's Bedford Township. This is in Loughborough Township down here. And if you look at the lot, you will see that they are a bit different. The lot concession, they go this way here in Loughborough Township, and they go this way up in Bedford Township. So because of the large concentration that is around Salmon Lake Loop, or Salmon Lake Road, pardon me, this is where we do our yearly historical walk. So last last Saturday. We basically walk this line here, which is the road itself. And with this, you end up being on the lot of the Camp, the Babcock, the Davids, the Sigsworths. So a whole bunch of lot, and you end up at the end here at the only lodge that was in the park. There is another concentration coming from the Amy Road that would be something like this going to the Birch Lake mine here. And in there you would get the Page, the Amy, the Bennetts, and the Burley along that line. There are the other roads. There was a road coming from the bottom here, and there you would have the Goodwin and the Gahans. At the north end from Kingsford Dam, there was a couple of farms there, the McNally especially. But the one I will try to concentrate today is these guys here. To reach this, there was a road called the Hardwood Bay Road, and it came this way, and it eventually went to what they call the mining lakes, which is Tet's Mine and Crab Lake, yes. And then it went into the Hardwood Bay. That's why it was called the Hardwood Bay Road. So I will try to concentrate on these lots at this area. So we will be in Bedford Township, and these lots would be where you would find the McComish, Scots, the Greens, and Hutchins, Blair's, although we will certainly concentrate on the McComish. Okay, next, I would like to give acknowledgement and credit to the person who's responsible for really recording and researching the human history of what's inside Frontenac Park and on its outskirts. It's certainly Christian Barber. He wrote the book with Terry Fuchs, but certainly Christian was the one who was the driving force behind the whole thing. He worked for 10 years, and he had a full-time job and a family, and he spent 10 years of his life researching and did this massive task, and he put out this book in 1997 called Our Enduring Spirit. And if you don't have a copy and if you'd like one, it's available on the Friends website, friendsofFrontenac.com, or at the park office itself. Now, just to show you some of the stuff that Christian, oh, if you don't know what he looks like, this is Chris here. And this is Terry Fuchs here. This is again, Chris with Linda. Hi, Linda, by the way. And this is Tom Marsh. In this occasion, they decided to try to test if it was possible because they have heard that loggers were floating logs between Big Salmon and Little Salmon Lake. So they did a sort of historical adventure going down the creek on that year. But during his research, Chris started with Bruce Page's note. Bruce Page was the first park superintendent, a local boy. His great-grandfather was the one who was the first homesteader within what is today Frontenac Park. And he was also, I mean, as a local boy, he knew some of the people and he was interested in history. So he started writing himself some note, and that became available to the research that Chris was doing. He also relied at the beginning on the Meacham map, which is an atlas of Frontenac, Lennox, and Addington in Ontario. It was published in 1878. And what is beautiful about this is that it shows you stuff like, for example, this is where the office is today. And it shows you that William Kemp in 1878 had this lot, and it even shows you right here where his house was. So imagine when you have a snapshot in time, and it's not perfect, but it gives you an idea to start your research, to start looking at what family was where, and then you can go from there. Well, he went from there because he spent lots of time at the Loughborough and Bedford Township offices. He looked into the Frontenac County Land Registry records, the bylaws, the tax assessment, the minutes of council meeting, microfilm, census. And it's not always easy because some of those sometimes are missing because of fire and other things. But he went through all this. Imagine the amount of time. He also did something like 350 interviews with descendants, and he took them on field trips at various times. For example, these guys here, he calls them the boys of Desert Lake. They're all people that would be in some way associated with the people who were living along the Amy Road. Names like the Page, Amy, there was Lehman, Abrams, Deo. Actually, there was 2 Babcocks, and they were not even related. Over here, it was the Marks from Crab Lake Mines. So we have Marks and Morrison. So he took them to show them, asked me how was the operation, how did it work? At the bottom here, we have Mel Wilson, who was the great-grandson, no, not the great-grandson, the grandson of George and Mary Kemp, who had the farm at the entrance of the park. And over here we have Art Green, who was the, let's say, became the owner, manager of the lodge at Salmon Lake, where the boat launch is today. Now, all his research note and everything and fantastic sketches is available at the Queen's University Archives. And I mean, if you're interested, this is a great place to go and look. In 1999, Chris wanted to GPS the location of all the historical sites. The Friends had done a GPS of the trail in 96, 97. And when Chris asked if anybody wanted to go with him and Linda to all these sites, I volunteered and was part of the crew. And this is where I learned from him where most, if not all, the historical sites were at the park. Now, having said that, and I say again, thank you to Chris. And if you need the book, it's available at the park office and at the Friends website. Now, today, what I would like to do is center, like I mentioned, on the family that was living just north of Black Lake, called the McComish family or McComish family, depending. And the reason is because they were the last one to leave. They were probably the one that lasted the longest as farmer. Imagine, we think they were here as early as 1864 and they left in 1953. You're talking 4 generations of McComish farming in the park and having this farm at Black Lake during all this time. All right, so let's meet. Sorry, here I'll show you, I guess, a slide of the lot that we're talking about. First of all, just to try to put you in a situation, let's see here. This is Big Salmon Lake. Campsite 5 is about here. This is Little Clear Lake. Campsite 9 is about here. This is Black Lake. And this is Bear Lake up here. Now the trail today, let's say you were doing the Big Salmon Lake loop, you would go at the bottom of Little Clear, and then you go something like that, and you keep on going. And eventually, if you keep on going straight, you end up at the Clear Lake Road. And naturally, you would have to go south if you're following the Big Salmon Lake loop. There is also a trail over here that goes up this way towards Campsite 9 and up further. So the lot that we're talking about is this one right here. And the Black Lake farm was situated right in this spot. And what you have to know, it was a half lot that the McComish sort of owned. I'm saying sort of owned because They never bothered taking a patent on it until the third generation in 1943. During that time, when they first established themselves, the Chaffees were here. They had the patent for the other half lot. Now, the Chaffees and the Tet at the time were sort of in business together, doing logging and later mining. So they own a good chunk of the northern part of the park. So this is now, we're going to talk about the people who live there. George McComish Sr. came apparently from Scotland, and his wife was a Lilias Porter, and they had, it says here, six children, but actually there's another place that I found it could have been a seventh one, but it doesn't matter. George McComish and his children, they built the Black Lake Farm. And what is a person to remember is this guy here, George the Younger, because he's going to be the second generation that will keep the work of George Sr. and the group. So if we were looking at some of the work that they've done, we would see that they've taken probably a shanty, which was a log shanty, and they made it into a two-story house with a stone foundation. It is absolutely, certainly the best foundation of anything that you can find in the park or at the Black Lake Farm. They were building these dry stone wall, no mortar on these things. And there is all sorts, the cattle barn, the pig pen, a big retaining wall, the foundation of the house, all done in a similar way and using some stone that God knows how they were able to lift. For example, here we see Chris Barber standing by the pig pen on the Black Lake Farm. So let's go now into the second generation. Second generation, like I mentioned, George McComish Jr., or sometimes called George the Younger. A lot of people like to be called George in that time, I guess. It must be because George the King, I don't know. Anyway, George McComish Jr., his wife was Susanna Green, and together they had 7 children. The first one, and the one that is important in our case here, will be Matthew Albertus, better known as Bert McComish. Then there was Wallace, and we have 2 of his son here, Russell and Walter. Russell and Walter, unfortunately, around, let's say 13, 14 years old, they passed away. They both died of diphtheria, and they are buried right now. Well, right now, at the time, they're still there. They're buried on the Black Lake Farm in unmarked grave. There's also Lillian, Elgin, and Kenneth. So you can see that George, with his first wife, Susanna, they had a bunch of children that were able to help on the farm and keep the farm growing. When Susanna passed away, George remarried with May Carrington. Now, let's have a photograph of George and May. The interesting part about May Carrington, it is said that she was what they call a mail order bride. I guess in those days, they didn't have any dating app. So if you wanted to meet someone, you would put an ad in the paper. Exactly how it worked, it depends which descendant talks to in the interview to Chris Barber. Basically, one of them said that one of the son, Wallace, of Georgia, thought his father was very lonely, so he decided to put an ad in the paper in the name of his father, saying something like, I don't know, lonely farmer looking, widowed farmer looking for for companionship, I guess, I don't know. But apparently May Carrington answered. They exchanged letters, and eventually George sent her the money to come and live on the farm. They got married, and there she is. So we have second wife of George. They never had any children. George was probably fairly well. He wasn't young, and neither was May, although she was about something 5 years younger than he was. Now George was a very sociable person. He loves talking. He was very religious, never swore. He loves reading. He could read all sorts of stuff, the paper and other things. And May was a bit the opposite. May was very, very quiet, apparently. She was a good-hearted woman. Apparently she had some very odd ways, but really we don't know much about May at all. All we know is that George and her, they were married, and she lived on the Black Lake farm with George and some of the children. So let's go to now the third generation. And I mentioned Bert McComish here. Bert McComish decided at one time to get married, and he married Minnie Timmerman. Minnie was a widow. Her husband died, drowned, when she was pregnant with her daughter Hazel. And how they met is very interesting. Imagine you're Minnie, and you're a widow, and you have your daughter Hazel, and you have to make a living in those days. So what she was doing is taking care of, let's say, sick people. And what she would do, if they needed long-term care, she would move into the house with Hazel and basically help. And it just happened that Lillian, which was Bert's sister, married a votary, and she was sick. Actually, she died quite young. And it just happened that Minnie and Hazel were taking care of Lillian in her house. And this is how Bert came and visited the sister and saw Minnie, and eventually they got married. After they got married, it didn't take long that they had their first son, Donald, and he was born also at the Black Lake farm. When Minnie and Bert got married, they moved in with George and May. So, and even if there was two women, I guess, in the kitchen, they got along fine, apparently. So I wanted to also mention that George McComish Jr., all his 7 children were also born at the Black Lake house, at the Black Lake farm. So we have then Bert now married with Minnie and Hazel, and later Donald with May and George, all living at the Black Lake house, taking care of the farm. Okay, let's meet Bert McComish and his wife, Minnie. One thing from what I've read, one thing I have to say is these people were amazingly hardworking people. Bert wasn't well all his life, had a health problem, especially asthma. He could hardly breathe sometime. And imagine a farmer, you know, in the hay and with all the pollen, and you can hardly breathe. Apparently, sometimes he could hardly talk because he could hardly breathe, and it made him, from what people say, kind of grouchy. And I can believe that, because it makes me grouchy too, and when I have a sniffle. So imagine if you spent a lot of time in pain like this. But with this, he was ambitious. He worked hard and was an excellent provider for his family. Beside him was even, I would think, a most remarkable woman, because Minnie, not only did she, I would think, work outside as hard as Bert did, but she had to do the inside. She had to do a lot of extra stuff just to support Bert. And when he wasn't well, she was taking the slack with the children. So really, these two, I have to say, they were, you will see later when I'll show you some of the stuff that they were doing for the farm. It's just, I mean, I have to say, they are remarkable people. Here, I will show you some photograph of the Black Lake farm, and those were taken in the 70s. Now, what you see here, it's pretty hard to see, but the trail slash road goes about through here, in between the two. This was a horse barn, and this one here became, we'll call it a sheep barn. The footing of that sheep barn is very visible today. We have a historical plaque in front of it. Now, another view of it, this is again here, this is the road going towards Clear Lake, Little Clear Lake. Over here, you can hardly see it, but that was the horse barn, and across, which you can hardly see, is also the sheep barn. Today, the sheep barn looks like this, and I'm sure that you have seen this one because it's pretty hard to miss if you were hiking the Salmon Lake loop. Now, the way that the McComish were building these things, they would dig into the side of a hill, and then they would put in these massive dry stone walls. And then at the top, about partway at the top here, they would start putting logs, and then they would build a structure on top of it here. I don't know what it was look like because we never had really a good picture of it. And the idea was that they could come from the back and put hay in the wooden structure, while the front here was always left open, so that, for example, George's sheep could come in and out as they wanted to. So this is how they build their pig pen. This is how also they build this large sheep cattle barn. I say that because when George Sr. was having the farm, he was using this for his cattle. But when George Jr. took the farm, he used that for his sheep. And Bert built him another cattle barn. Today, this is what you would see if you were looking for the horse barn that used to be right across from the sheep barn. Now, it's very hard to see in this picture, so I will draw the footing. You can still see it by the trail. The footing is around here. The trail, by the way, that's it here. And these are the logs from that horse barn. And here's the log from the horse barn. What happened again is Bruce Page, in order to try salvaging some of the wood in the hope that it would be rebuilt properly, dismantle this horse barn, and it sits again today right by the trail. And he put a metal roof on top of all the pile of logs to protect it from the elements so that it wouldn't rot. So let's see, this is a picture of what the house on Black Lake would look like. What is interesting in here is that you will notice that there is no windows. This photograph has been taken in the 30s from the road or the trail, if you want, and you will notice there's no windows. It's unusual because people in those days didn't have TV, and I guess one of the entertainment would be sitting by the window and watch who's coming up and down the road. Well, I guess the McComish didn't need to do this because all their windows practically faced Black Lake. Now here we have George himself. Sorry, here we have George himself. Here, his dog was Dan, and if you were looking here today on this rock, you will still see an eye bolt that George's brother, Edgar, pounded that many, many moons ago, supposedly to tie horses if they needed to. Now, this is the same house view, this time from the lake. And this would be in about 1974. And you'll notice how big of a structure it was. Like I say, 2 stories high. And apparently George and May's, their bedroom were on the 1st floor. Everybody else was on the 2nd floor. Now today, this is what's left. That was taken early this month. What's left is the foundation. Again, beautiful stone, dry stone walls in the foundation. And as you can see here, you can see the lake at the background. And there is a retaining wall just about here, a bit further, because there's quite a slope going down towards the lake. So apparently Minnie Timmerman loves to do her butter churning in there because it was cool, and then they would store the butter in this foundation, in this basically basement of the house. Another structure that was at the Black Lake Farm was a blacksmith shop. Sorry about how grainy those pictures are. They came from actually Marilyn Miller. She did research for, let's say, the Ministry of Culture and Recreation for the Ministry of Natural Resource, and wanting to know if there was some buildings that could be saved for, I guess, history and that type of stuff. And that's what happened, let's say, to Murphy's Point. If you want to see a real farm, if you want to see a mine, you go to Murphy's Point. They have it all. It was all part of the same research that Marilyn Miller. But she has a picture here of the blacksmith shop. It's taken from the lake. And if you look closely here, you can maybe see the old house was in there. It was not very big structure. This is the inside. This is where the forge itself, the fire, I guess, would be. And this was an anvil, a wooden anvil. Apparently, Hazel, Bert's and Minnie, really his daughter, she loved to come and operate the bellows at her grandfather's farm. She loved her grandfather, and she really, really enjoyed spending time with him. So she would come and help him on the farm as much as she could. This is a picture again of today. And what you can see if you went into the Black Lake Farm, this structure again that looks like the previous one, it's actually the pig pen. And it was built in the same fashion, dig in the side of the hill, put this wonderful dry stone wall. The other thing that you can see, this is the retaining wall that they put so that the slope wouldn't be too bad. So that means that the house foundation is really up here. The other thing that you can notice from here is this foundation here. This is where the blacksmith shop was. Again, today you can see this. So it's nice if you're hiking and you want a little break and you want to do a little history, you can look at this. But one thing that you would see certainly from the trail is this barn. This one was built in 1929 by Bert McComish. He built it to put the cattle, and so that the other place became the sheep barn. Now, what's interesting, this is the barn at different period of time. In this picture here, what I find interesting is that you can still see, over here, you can still see the house, the McComish house at the background. The first 2 pictures were taken in the 70s, the top one, the black and white ones. The one bottom left was in the 80s, and the one at the bottom right was taken in 1999. And today, this month, this is what it looks like. So it's getting lower and lower and naturally going away, but it's still visible. Now, if you wanted to see these places, I'll show you a little bit where you could find some of this. Now, this is a map. Thank you for Frontenac Maps, which is from the Frontenac County website, their maps. Here is the road / trail today. And the plaque, the historical plaque and all this, it's somewhere around here. Unfortunately, it's not showing here. The other thing, naturally, this is Black Lake at the bottom that you see. And this path that you can see, this is the portage between Black Lake and it goes towards Bear Lake. Now, but what you can see is in between the portage here, this thing is the 1929 barn that is sort of standing. This here is the foundation for the house. Over here, this thing is the pig pen. We see the retaining wall. And this area here, that's hard to see from the sky, I guess, is where the blacksmith shop was. So again, you just have to, from the main trail, you go down the portage towards Black Lake, and you can explore and see the Black Lake farm even today. Okay, let's move along with, there's a history of the McComish living at Black Lake. Now, in this map, I'm showing you a star, and that's where the Black Lake farm was for the McComish. I also show a yellow star. We're going to talk about that lot. That yellow star was the site of something called the Hardwood Bay Farm. Now, again, just to give you an idea, later on throughout the history, the Chaffees sold the lot to the Hutchins. So the Hutchins would be over here. Over here, George Green would be there. This is the site where you would see, for example, 4 or the plaque in front of the barn who has collapsed. So that would be the Greens farm that would be in there. The Blair would be more towards this area here, the Blair's farm. And there was the operation of the Hardwood Bay Farm. And that's what we're going to talk about. And we'll mention how it merged basically with the McComishes. So the Hardwood Bay Farm was started probably as early as 1845 by the business partners, Chaffees and Tetz, for logging and mining crews. They needed a place to go, I guess, at night. And also for the many horses that they were using in their operation. So they had stables there for the horses, and placed the house actually on that Hardwood Bay Farm was referred often as the Tetz boarding house. Well, as we started at the beginning, we mentioned that eventually the logging and the industry started to sort of go down, and the Chaffees and the Tetz sort of started pulling out of that operation and go somewhere else. The Lynch Lake, at one time, the big mica mine that the Tetz own was doing great guns, but then it's also started slowing down. And by 1916, it closed totally. So there was really no use for the Tetz to have the Hardwood Bay Farm. And by 1916, because it wasn't used very much anymore, it was certainly starting to show a sign of wear, and most of the stable accommodation for the horses had sort of fallen apart. Well, John Poole Ted decided that it would be a good thing to lease it, and the Scott family decided to lease it from John Poole Ted for apparently 2 payments of $30 for the entire year. Unfortunately for the Scott, by the accounts that we have, they didn't have a real good time at the Hardwood Bay farm. It looks like not only John Henry Scott and his family lived in there, but also his brothers, their wives, their children. Apparently at one time, there was something like 5 adults and 9 or 10 children for 3 beds. And their mattress were sacks that George McComish next door had given them, and they were stuffing it with straw for mattresses. So in other words, they were not having a very, very good time, but they still lasted 12 years. And in 1931, so 12 years, they were the neighbor of the McComish. In the 1931s, the Scots moved out, and they found another place to stay, and actually they did quite well at the other place, apparently. But what happened is that Bert McComish and Minnie, his wife, and basically their 2 children were still living at the Black Lake farm, and Bert saw an occasion to have his own place. So he talked to Edmund Tett, and he rented or leased, I guess, the place called the Hardwood Bay Farm for a whopping $25 a year. Naturally, as soon as they moved in, Minnie wanted to do some renovation. The roof was leaking a little bit, but the house was left by the Scots spotless, clean. But naturally, there was no building. The farm, they hadn't planted anything for years, so it was there. And the McComish, Bert and his family, they had work on their hands to revive that farm. Here's a photograph of the Hardwood Bay farm. The trail today goes down in here, and then it goes back on the other side. There's a creek down in here. It goes back on the other side of the hill. It's a winter scene, and the children of Bert and Minnie, one thing that they didn't have many toys and didn't play much, but in the winter, they had a homemade toboggan, and where the trail is, apparently they love tobogganing that slope. And I'm sure people who have walked there, this is on the way to campsite 9, for example, as you go up on the east side of Little Clear Loop. This is the house here, the Tett's boarding house, and we see a couple of buildings. But like I say, the Bert McComish and Minnie, they were really people who like hard work, and they planted huge gardens. They grew carrots, beans, beets, and they had a whole field of potatoes. They made maple syrup also. It's spring, why not? They didn't have a sugar shack, but they had a big pail, not a pail, it's more like a big pan, not that deep, that they would put the sap in there and they would boil it. If I recall, I've seen this pan or part of it still in the wood somewhere in there. There was not much Christmas on the farm, but Hazel McComish remember being at one of the barn, and it was Christmas time, and she hears bells ringing like jingle, just like Santa Claus was coming, and the 2 kids came out of the barn, left their chores behind, thinking that Santa Claus had arrived. And as it turned out, they found out later it was grandfather George who played a little trick on them. And like I say, they loved George because he was always very social and very good to the children. So another thing that Bert and Minnie McComish built, they built a series of barns. They built 7 barns on the farm for various purposes. I mean, this is, for example, you see one here. Basically, they just took a bunch of logs, put them directly on the ground, and used hay as a thatch roof for it. So like I say, they built 7 on the edge of the forest. On this picture, you can see a few in there. But again, not only did they have now field planted with all sorts of vegetable and stuff like this. They had a bunch of barns going on. And what I didn't mention is when Bert rented this lot, this farm from Mr. Tet, he also leased the lot directly above that one. So really now, the McComish holdings, you end up with at least 3 lots. Now here is a nice picture of what the house looked like with a roof on it and the little family. Here we have good old Bert McComish, Minnie, Hazel, the oldest. Here we had Donald, who was born at the Black Lake farm, and a new little girl, Ella. Ella McComish was born at the Hardwood Bay farm in 1933. She is believed to be the last child of farmers to be born within Frontenac Park. By the way, the name of the dog is Min, in honor of Mother Minnie Timmerman. The lady that's with them is an American. Apparently, on Sunday, it would be social time. And although Bert was a bit of a slave driver, he liked to socialize on Sunday, and sometimes they would get visitors coming in and visiting them. But many times what he would do, he would go with the entire family and they would go down the road to the Perth Road where his brother Wallace had his place, and they would visit with Wallace and his family for a while. Here we have a beautiful drawing on the left made by Chris Barber of the floor plan of that, the Tet boarding house, if you want, or the Hardwood Bay farm home. What I like is the upper here, because we know from there that the bedroom of Bert and Minnie was here, then Ella was there, Dawn and Hazel. Now there was no separation between, it was simply curtain, and this was on the 2nd floor. And this thing here is the stovepipe that went through to heat up the entire place. In the winter, they had a box stove, and they would put wood in there, and that stovepipe was the only heating that they had upstairs. I put on the beside it here, I put also this hand drawing, and this one was done by Hazel McComish for Chris Barber when he interviewed her. And one thing that she added to this thing is this thing called a trapdoor. Apparently Minnie wanted a place to store her vegetable, and I guess the Tets, when they build the place, the house, didn't have any some sort of cellar or anything like this. So good old Minnie and her brother, they cut a trapdoor through the floor, and then she and her brother, they hand dug this this cellar so they can store their stuff. Just to show you that Minnie was a force to be reckoned with when she wanted something. And here she is here inside the house with the milk separator. You notice also all the implements that you had there. Hazel had a great respect for her mother. She said that she could do anything. She could crochet. She was a good carpenter. She could make chairs. She would also carve little wooden animals, and I guess for toys for the kids. She also would, well, as the lady of the house, would have to bake bread, and apparently at the beginning she could only bake one bread at a time in what she had, but she invented her own contraption to allow her to bake more than one bread, because she had to do about a dozen a week. And on top of everything, she certainly would go and help her husband Bert with his health not being always great in the field. So as much as Hazel has respect for her mother, she certainly did not admire Bert that much, because as she grew older, Bert became more demanding, probably because she was the oldest of the family, and he was getting grouchier as he grew older, I would think. So here we have George McComish back on the Black Lake farm. He's still there with May, and many times Hazel, just because she likes her grandfather and had difficulty maybe with her father Bert, she would come over and help George Jr. or George the Younger on his farm, especially at lambing time. She loves helping him with the lamb, but she would also do all sorts of stuff with him. Now, George was getting old himself. He was getting also, his health wasn't the greatest. May was with him, but he wasn't alone on the farm. Not only Bert and Minnie were taking care of their own farm, but they were also helping on George's farm. And no doubt that Wallace, who lived, another of his son who lived on the Perth Road, would certainly come in. But a person that came and helped him was his grandson, Malcolm Votary, Lillian's son. He would spend his summer, when he was younger, he would spend his summer helping George on the farm. And after he graduated from grade 7 or 8, he spent nearly a year or two helping George on the Black Lake farm. Now we have a picture of good old George here with his pipe. George realized that as the year went by, people started discovering recreation, and camping was sort of getting in demand. So George decided to build a couple of platform, and he would rent this to people who wanted to camp on the shore of Little Clear Lake. He knew perfectly well that it wasn't even on his land, it was on the Hutchins land, but you know, the McComish and the Hutchins always had a very close relationship. They knew each other from years back. But you see here, good old George sitting on a platform that he had built. And you see the same platform right here in which Dr. Parks, who came from the States, came in for many years, somewhere between the late 20s to all the way to 1941. And so the Parks family would come in, they would spend some time, given a certain amount of money. I would imagine it was not very much, to George to be able to use the platform. And here we see the road, and Little Clear is on the other side, on this side. In other words, on this side of the road, that way is Little Clear. But George, apparently being social, liking to talk, after supper, he would walk over from the Black Lake farm to talk and have a little chat with Mr. and Mrs. Park. And he would smoke a pipe, and they would have a jolly old time. And he wouldn't refuse a little bit of whiskey if Mr. Park would serve. So here, a bit of life on the farm. This photograph was taken around 1942, and we see the McComish, they're involved into getting some hay. Here is Bert McComish. His son is getting taller now. His son Donald, Minnie is over here. And this little girl now is Ella McComish. She's starting to get old. And naturally their dog Min is over there. But who is missing is Hazel. Hazel, by that time, was around 18, 19 years old. And her and Bert were not getting along very well. And she was able to find herself a job in Westport at a mica cleaning shop. Therefore, she left the farm. And now on the Hardwood Bay farm, Bert and the two kids and Minnie, they were the ones that were left to take care of everything. Here, one thing that is interesting to note, Bert didn't like his kids going to school. He thought that if you were going to be a farmer, you didn't need any type of education. So most of the education that the kids got, they got it from Minnie. She sort of did the homeschooling. Other things that they would do on the farm, we see here Bert McComish and Ella in the middle, and Dan over there. And if you notice, they all have rifles. I mean, when you're born on a farm like this, far away from everybody, it doesn't take long, you know how to handle a rifle, how to go hunting and all this. Bert always had this saying that he would tell the kids, if you have time to play, you have time to work. So therefore, the kids were not allowed to play very much. However, hunting and fishing was considered work because it could put food on the table. So the kids were excellent at this. Also the McComish, the entire family, not only Bert and the kids here, but also the entire family, like George, they were excellent horse whisperer, I would say. And apparently Ella and Don had no problem riding bareback and even standing on the horses as they was moving. Over here we have Bert McComish is over here, and here is his brother Wallace. And what they are doing, they are cutting ice probably on Devil Lake. By this time, the Ratkoff had bought the farm from Point George Green, and they made it into a cottage. They were from the States, and Bert McComish and their family would render some services for them. And one of them would be to cut ice during the winter and put it in a nice house, packed it so that when they would come in, you know, they would have in their ice box, they would be able to have their food kept cool. With all the work that, and all the farm that Bert had in hand, well, I guess it wasn't enough work for him because he happened to be walking on a lot that was unoccupied south of Bear Lake, and he saw a little fleck of mica on the surface. So he bought the lot and decided he would start his own mine. So at the bottom, you see me GPSing Bert McComish's mine. Ella and Don remembered that they would bring the horses and they would help their father because the horses would be tied to rocks and they would pull the rocks out and all this. All in all, I don't think Bert should have bought the place because I don't think he made much money with that mica mine. So life was going pretty good at one time. George was getting older and his health wasn't so good. So one day he went to see the doctor in Westport, and he was supposed to be back the same day. That's what he had told May, his wife. I'm gonna go to the doctor back the same day. Unfortunately, there was a series of thunderstorm, and poor George decided to stay overnight in Westport. When he came back to the Black Lake home the next day, I couldn't find May anymore. They looked everywhere, they couldn't find her. So we have two here copies of articles that appear in the Week Standard. This was in August 1941. And the first one is about this lady that's been lost in the woods. And the second one is about starting to drag operation into Clear Lake because they thought she could have either got lost in the wood or either tripped and fell into the lake and never to be seen again. The police search, eventually the army were called in to search, and the McComish themselves did their own search in a very peculiar way. They, I don't know where they got, but I guess someone told them that what you could do here is you see this gentleman, which looked a bit like Wallace, it could have been. He's holding a loaf of bread. And what they would do, they would have a little container of mercury that they would put inside the bread. And the idea was to float it on the water. And they were told that what this would do, if there was a body at the bottom of the water, it would attract the body and make it float to the surface so they could recover the body. Well, they tried that, and naturally, May's remains were never found. Never, we never saw any sign of May. And poor George here was totally a wreck, because he felt so bad and so guilty, thinking that if he would have been there when he was supposed to be the day before, maybe she would still be around. And remember, in those days, there was no telephone for him to be able to phone on the farm to say, hey, I'll be late, honey. No. So he felt terribly bad. His health wasn't good. His mental state was horrid. So Bert and Minnie, that's over here, decided to take old George with them into their house at the Hardwood Bay farm. So that was the last time that someone was living in the Black Lake house, because George went and lived the rest of his life with his son, Bert. He didn't last long at the Hardwood Bay farm. 2 years later, in 1943, Bert passed away. During that time, not Bert, excuse me, George passed away. During that time, after this, naturally, the rest of the Bert and his family, they kept on working all the farm land that they had, probably with help from the rest of the family. But eventually, in 1951, about 8 years after his father passed away, Bert, his health failing, also passed away. So now the people left on the farm is Donald, Ella, the two kids, the fourth generation, with Minnie McComish. This photograph was probably taken the summer after Bert passed away. Bert passed away in February. Here we see Hazel McComish, and by this time Hazel had been married, and she is Hazel Blair, and this is Ella McComish in her probably around 20. The two children are Hazel, but this is after Bert passed away, and Hazel and Dawn and their mother tried to keep on farming the farm on Black Lake and Hardwood Bay. Unfortunately, after a while, it proved a bit much, especially when Donald had found work outside the farm. So he would go to his work, come back to the farm in the evening and the weekends. So eventually in 1953, they decided to fold it up, and they left for good. They were the last farming family to leave what is now the interior of Frontenac Park. In the 1970s, the house at the Hardwood Bay farm looked like this. The roof had collapsed, but it was still in pretty good shape. And the first park superintendent, Bruce Page, wanted to save it, waiting for the famous park plan to tell them what to do. So he dismantled it and stacked the wood and tagged every single one of those logs, and then put on top of it, he put a metal roof to protect it. The idea was once he gets the go ahead, he would put it back together. Now, here at the front, you can see where the house stood. This was the footing here. The house was here. And this is what Minnie and her brother dug for their basement. So the thing, you can see that actually this section, the pile of wood can be seen if you pay attention from the trail. Now I'm going to show, I guess, an upper view, just to show you that the trail basically going towards campsite 9, I'll say. The trail comes down this way, follows, and then it crosses a creek on the bridge there, and then it goes somewhere up here. And at the top here, there's a pile of old parts, car parts. That was Bert's old car parts. Around here, there is the, you can see the farm well. If I was blowing this up, this is where the pile of logs are left. So you can see that, I said, from the trail. The series of barn that Bert built were all in here somewhere. There's nothing left, but there's a few artifacts that you might find if you were looking in there. You can see the track of the old road, the original Hardwood Bay Road that the Tets put came right through their farms and going up that way. And this here, this section here going there was used by the McComish as a shortcut to go between the Hardwood Bay Farm and the Black Lake Farm. Now, in this area, the sort of north of the house in the woods, you find a whole pile of old car parts again. Apparently, Bert liked to buy an old car and drive it until it falls apart. And when it wasn't working anymore, he would buy another old car and try to use, and if it fell apart too, he would try to use parts from the first one to fix the second one, and he would do that on and on. So he has a very good let's say, supply of old parts and bits and pieces of cars, and they're all over here. I think Chris Barber used to call this the debris field. There's also in that same area something called a pig scalding station, and this is also, I think, where the pan for the sugar maple that they were using, part of it is still over there. So again, from the trail, without having to go too far, you can see some of those. Now, this is a picture of the well as you pass by the trail, and as you go up, like I say, on a bit, if you look to your right, you will see the car parts that's over there. Just to show you on this path here, you can see the trail. So the trail is over there, the cars are right beside it. This is on the farm also. This is the debris field, a whole bunch of other car parts spread all over the place. Up here is the scalding station. One thing that Ella said, she was born on the farm and a farm girl, but one thing that she couldn't stand is, let's say, the preparation of a pig for the table. She just couldn't stand this. Now, in the area where the barn was, you can find here a leftover of a wagon, probably a wagon either from Donald or Ella. The thing is, it was put on a fork in the tree, and now you have this part that's stuck in the tree. The bottom part is here, and naturally, it was a wooden platform that would join the two. The wooden platform has rotted away. But if you were keeping your eyes open and you look on the Hardwood Bay Farm, you can find beautiful stuff. And here we have a picture of Ella McComish in 1990 when in one of the trip that Chris took her. She's standing in front of Welly Green's big barn. Welly Green is in the inset there at the bottom. Welly Green was always considered by the McComish kid as a big brother. When they had difficulty with their father, Welly Green was sort of a neighbor-ish, and they could rely on him. The McComish, they helped the Green, Welly, put up the barn, and Welly Green himself never resided on his father's farm, George Green. There's been a little kerfuffle between the McComish and the estate of George Green, because George McComish Jr. Apparently bought the farm, but one of the sons of George Green thought the farm was his. So George McComish sued the estate of the Green. And with all this, well, eventually the farm went back to Wellington Green. Wellington Green already had his own place on Perth Road. What he used this is also for hay and stuff, and he had some sheep, but also with the help of the McComish, they built a shanty for him, and he would come in there when he was working the farm, and often the children, the McComish children, will come with him because he had a Marconi radio, battery powered, and he could go and listen to the Grand Ole Opry with him. He was mainly a trapper, so he had a few, Willie, Mr. Green, Wellington, better known as Willie, had a bunch of sort of trapping shack across the park. Mainly, there's still some sort of standing place at somewhere around Camel Lake. He had one on the island on Big Salmon Lake that people referred to as the Devil's Oven Island. But he was very friendly with the McComish and the children. Here we see a picture of John McComish in 2012, taking on the Black Lake farm beside a moor. When Ella McComish and her brother and Minnie left, apparently Ella and Dawn, they moved that moor where it is today, just north of the trail, sort of close to the portage going to Bear Lake. And it is still there today. And John McComish was telling us about some of the stuff. John McComish is the son, or was the son of Wallace, and therefore George Jr. was his grandfather. And that's the end, basically, of the McComish story. There are still stuff to be seen in the park. I discover new things all the time. As recently as last winter. I won't tell you what these things are because they are, we don't have time probably. I went way over time. So I'll thank you very much for your attention. I hope you didn't all fall out somewhere, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any question, I'm sure that Simon can relay them to me.
Oh, wow, thank you very much, Jérôme. You have an amazing wealth of knowledge. It's an excellent talk. Thank you. And thank you for putting it together. Yes, we have had a very good turnout tonight, and so welcome questions from people. Either unmute and speak, or put them in the chat, and I'll try and catch them. So seeing some very nice comments, but
Jérôme, it's Steve Goodman here. Just wondering, I'm so sorry I missed your last tour there on Saturday. Unfortunately, I had a conflict. Do you know when you're going to be running the next one?
Next year. Generally, we run in once a year, early in the spring. There used to be a time we used to run it in the fall, but it was conflicting because a lot of people would like to do the challenge. And I find that in the spring, after the snow is gone, it's much easier to see where things are. The moment the grass starts growing, basically most of these places are hard to see and disappear. So the next one will probably be in April next year. You're welcome, and if you need a private tour, I can maybe be talking to it one of these days.
I'll be offering in the near future.
Thank you. Right, thanks so much. We have a question from John B. Do you know the history of the small cabin on the southeast shore of Slide Lake?
On the southeast east shore of Slide Lake. The cabin belonged to a gentleman by the name of Ken Keller. When the park acquired the land, it was still standing and in fairly good condition. And at one time, the Rideau Trail proposed to man it and maybe sort of, let's say, check people coming from the Rideau Trail to make sure, I guess, that they would have, I guess, a permit or something like this. In the early days, when you would go to that cabin, there was a fairly good path leading to it. When you would go to that cabin, there were still bunk beds in there. There was a beautiful fireplace, and you would find a lot of Rideau Trail marker, both the blue ones and the orange ones. But it's always a problem having a structure where people can stay, because damage gets done to it, and there's chances that people would put a fire to it for some reason. So now it is still, well, last time I was there was a few years ago. It was still standing, but it's starting to be in bad shape also. That's as much as I know about it.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you. And there's another question from Tony. Thanks for the presentation. Did the farmers sell any of what they produced, or was it all subsistence farming?
Yes. Well, some of the logging, they certainly would sell it either for cordwood or even on contract with people like the Tets. But if they were all churning their own butter, and if they had any excess, they could take it. For example, the McComish, they were close to Bedford Mill, so they would probably take it to, I would imagine, the Tets on Bedford Mill. That they had a store, the Tet store, and probably sell it to them. I know that, for example, the Salmon Lake Road and places like this, they will also sell their extra butter or they would exchange it at the general store for certain items. The fruit and vegetables, the Babcocks, for example, that were at Arab Lake, they had quite a good orchard and vegetable, and they would make the trip first from the farm in the park to their other farm in Kepler, south of Sydenham. And then at 3 o'clock in the morning, they would take all the produce and take it to Kingston, probably most likely to the market to sell. So they would sell their vegetables and they would sell their apples, especially in the autumn. But yes, most of the thing, most naturally they would have a large garden for themselves, and they would do a lot of picking of berries, and they would can and make jam and that type of stuff for their own consumption. But if they had a bit more, they certainly could use the cash to buy other things, and that's what they would do.
Thank you. I think there's a note from Sue to everyone. Some shipped cream, she says. So yeah.
South of?
There's some shipped cream was a comment from one of the participants. Cream, yes.
Oh yeah, cream.
Yeah. Okay. Another question. Who built the roads and who was responsible for their maintenance?
Well, who built the roads? We didn't talk much about the lots and concession, but when they divided the things in lots and concession, they had what they call a road allowance in between each concession. And unfortunately, in Frontenac Park, none of those, quote, road allowance were ever used. So we can say that all the roads that came into Frontenac Park, what it is now the park, were sort of forced road. Now, they were pathed way before they were taken, let's say, in charge by the township. For example, the road that led to the Black Lake Farm, it was the Tets or the Chafee probably who sort of a road so that they could access their logging and their mining operation. And eventually, in 1881, if I recall, it became a township road. And once it's a township road, especially in the early days, it's sort of each farmer would take care of the section that was on their lot. And if they needed some help or something, they could be maybe get a little pay for doing it. But eventually, throughout the ages, the idea of having a township road was that they would take care of it. But for many times, and it happened on practically every single road that is in the park, that at one time or another, the farmers themselves sort of were coached by the township to take care of the road in front of them and given a few dollars sometimes for it. But who built them? For example, Salmon Lake Road became a township road in 1862, but we know it existed there as a path for years before anybody ever established themselves. Probably because people like the indigenous people would know that there was Salmon Lake and there, and there was good fishing, so they would probably have path going in there anyway.
Right. Thank you. Thanks so much. I think Steve Koopman just put a note about the Buck Lake building again. That he, what do you want to say, Steve? That you actually saw that building?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. I just quickly, it was the Keller property, I think, that Jerome just mentioned on Slide Lake.
Yeah,
because I don't think that's officially marked on the map, is it?
No, I don't think it's marked on the map. And to get to there, certainly you have to get far up the trail, and that's probably why it's not marked on the map.
Yeah, I never knew it existed, and I never put my canoe into Slide Lake until we just did the portage from Buck Lake last year, and just happened to be close to the shoreline. I said, "What is that?" So it was very interesting to see it.
Yeah, you see it much better from the water. But like I say, in the early days, actually, where the entrances from the east side, from the Rideau Trail, when you got into the park where they have the sign, in the early days, there was actually cows still grazing in there. And you could see, and the trees were certainly not as tall as they are, and you could see a clear path leading to that place. But now everything is grown over, and actually they moved the trail away from the sort of the field more to closer, basically, to the trees. But yeah, it's you see it fairly easy if you paddle on Slide Lake.
Was it used as a trapper's cabin or anything like that? That's what I thought it was the first time I saw it.
I would have to refresh my memory about what Ken Keller was using it for. I'm not too sure, but I know he built it, and I think it was more like a cottage, but it could have been a cabin for trapping and fishing. I know he also had a fishing shack. And there's a photograph in it in the book. Well, let's say there's a photograph in the book that has been mislabeled, in my opinion. I may be wrong, but in the book there's a photograph that they say it's the McComish blacksmith shop. But if you look closely, you will see there's a canoe in front of it, and it turns out that it's probably Ken Keller's fishing shack, and that would have been around where the Ken Keller, we call it the Ken Keller cabin, would be. Exactly why, like I say, I would have to refresh my memory. I'm getting old.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much. And I just say I remember the cows there in 1987.
Yeah.
Yep. So thank you. One other question from Tony. Did the farmers sell to the province in 1953? I guess when they sold up. who bought the
Well,
properties? Yeah.
yes, it depends who. It
Mhm.
depends who. Some people did sell their lots to the province or were expropriated because they were not happy with the amount of money that were given to them. But you have to remember that by the time the park started acquiring the land, there was no farmers anymore within the
Mhm.
park. Like I say, the McComish had left in 53. Although, according to John McComish, he said that his father, Wallace, he would still come into the park to pick up hay that were on the old farms until they finally closed the gate and then they stopped coming in. But what was in the park after the farmers left was cottages. So there was a few cottage where campsite 6 is. There was some on Clear Lake, and these people had bought the lot. For example, the Hutchins property, the Platts bought that, and they put a couple of nice big cottages on it. And well, they were told eventually to leave, and it's not everybody was happy about it. But places like the Babcock on the Salmon Lake Road, they had their farm was a 600-acre farm. They had 3 lots, and Gwen Brown, the granddaughter, and her husband were the last one to own it. And when they left, they stopped paying taxes on it. Therefore, it reverted to the township, or in between, it was purchased by a company who just buy fire sale lots that were in arrear, and the government bought it from them also. So a lot of those were abandoned. The government bought it. The ones that were not, they compensated the people that were either there as a cottage, or if they had anything, if they own it, they would give them some money for it. But it's not everybody was happy. For example, Art Green, who had the lodge where the Salmon Lake canoe launch is, certainly wasn't happy with the amount of money he got from the government.
All right. Ah, thank you. Thanks. Are there any more questions? I have 1 or 2, but I'll give everyone else the chance.
Jerome, if you didn't mind, it's Steve again. I may have missed it at the beginning, and I apologize if I did. What are Frontenac Parks as an Ontario Parks recommendation in terms of the trails? I know sometimes you can see things just a few feet off the trail as compared to exploring. And then if we were to even come across any remnants, is there any use in attempting to keep a full record or track of these? You may already be doing so, but I know there's some technology like what 3 words or latitude and longitude to be able to mark them all, as much as obviously we don't want to touch them or remove them from their location.
Well, as far as I know, the park doesn't want you to remove it. Recently, I did a canoe, well, recently, a few years now, I did a canoe trip that actually Simon did before me, starting, let's say, Big Salmon Lake into Camel Lake, and then you follow a series of pond all the way down to the Slide Lake Trail at the bottom of the lake. And a few years ago, I had done that before. And then a few years ago, I tried to do the same. And when I got to one of the very large pond, the beaver dam had busted and there was barely a little trickle in the middle of the pond. So instead of carrying my canoe, I just walk along the shore just to see. And suddenly sticking out of that mud was a piece of pottery. So something that we didn't know was there, a piece of pottery. So what I did, I took a GPS coordinate of it. I moved it a bit off that if the water came back into the pond, it would not be submerged anymore. I took a photograph showed it to the superintendent, and that's where it stayed. But generally, I've seen people, for example, finding garbage. The people in those days didn't have a dump truck coming and pick up their garbage. And if they had a few pieces of garbage, which didn't have much in those days, but they would stick it somewhere. And I've seen people finding some of those and bringing it back to the parks, thinking that basically someone had been littering. No, the park doesn't want to get the artifacts brought to them. So generally, like I say, you can use what 3 words if you want, but I use a GPS and take the GPS coordinate with a photograph of it. And I let them know that it's there. And we'll see if ever they wanted to take it any further.
Thanks again. Is there any central registry or anyone that's like an official Friends of Frontenac Park to compare or to make sure we're not duplicating, or say we actually come across something that you haven't seen, as much as it sounds like that's unlikely?
Well, no, but it happens. Just a couple of years, no, maybe 3 years ago, someone contacted Ben Chabot at the park and said, there is a foundation that I found quite a while back with a friend of mine. Do you know what that would be? And Ben contacted me and asked me if I would know what it is. And I said, well, I don't know where. So this gentleman came with me and showed me where it was. And new foundation, we never knew it existed. And the odd part is that it's spitting distance from the trail on Tetzmine Loop. Actually, once you know now, I see it every time I walk by, and for years I never knew it was there. We still don't know who was there, what it was for, but there is a fairly large foundation and a smaller one beside that looks like it would have been some sort of barn or shed for something. But we discover things like this all the time, but I don't think there's a central registry for these things. I know that I mentioned it to Ben. Whether he writes it down, I'm not sure.
Thanks again, Jérôme. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Any more questions? I guess I'll just ask one, and it is that this is, an incredibly detailed history of this family, and I know that this was done through the interviews and the intensive work that Chris and Terry did. Are the other families documented in as much detail? Did he obtain as much information from others, or was this the best case in the park?
Well, I think it's one of the best case in the park, mainly because Hazel McComish, Ella McComish were still alive. Mm-hmm. And I mean, Ella had been born on the farm in there. She had spent practically all her life until 1953 in there, till her 20s. Right. So when you have access to her and you bring her back and say, well, show me where this was, what happened and all this. So you get a lot more information. The same with Hazel, her sister. Also, he brought her there and he was able to get a lot of information. The same with the other McComish, like John McComish, who passed away fairly recently. He also was interviewed by Chris Barber. The other place that we know quite a bit was of the Kemp, and mainly because Mel Wilson, the grandson of George and Mary Kemp, spent a lot of time with his grandparents and had a fabulous memory, it seemed. And it looks like Chris certainly spent a lot of time talking to him and getting as much information from Mel Wilson as possible. But he went and interviewed so many people, and when he would meet a family, one of the first things that he would do would be a family tree, and everybody that he interviewed, if you look in his documents at the at the archives, he put a star beside the people that he has interviewed in that family tree. And like I say, the McComish is probably one of the better ones, again, because some of the other people was grandchildren or even further down the line that he was talking to. But I mean, this book is so detailed and there's so much information that it is, like I say, it is a massive task that Chris did putting all of this together.
It's truly amazing. Thanks. And of course, your own contribution to it too. So thank you. Thank you very much.
I didn't
Yes.
do much. I basically regurgitate what Chris has been saying.
It's amazing. Thank you. Well, I'll just say thank you very much again. And it's been a great evening. And yeah, for both your extensive knowledge and excellent compilation of the presentation and excellent delivery. So thank you so much indeed. That's very good. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
Yeah. So thanks. Once again, thanks everyone for coming along as well. I can just do one quick share if you permit me. I have a closing slide, but I did have one here of the cows at Slide Lake. If that's showing. Yes. Back in 1987.
It's twirling yet. Oh, there we are.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Yes.
That's doing Slide Lake Loop, coming across bulls and calves and things in the park. Yeah.
And you see that big pond there.
Yeah. Okay.
The big pond, if I recall. The big pond, if I recall. Oh, there we are.
Yeah.
It was called Ken Keller's Pond by a barber.
Right.
Because apparently Ken Keller, there was, if I recall, and I'm going from memory a bit, if I recall, there was a bunch of beaver dams, and Ken Keller thought that if he blew the beaver dam, it would sort of clear the path because it was encroaching on the road, but it did totally the opposite. It flooded his spot and it became Ken Keller's Pond.
I see. Right. Yes. So yeah. A few more, but there was, yes, I think there's some more cows coming back as well. There we are. Yeah. Through the woods.
Grass.
Yes. Oh yes, the grass there. It's yeah, that's now getting well grown up, coming through it. And the cows, yeah, once again.
Sorry, what was that? Was that the pond that's about half a kilometer south of Slide Lake?
Yes, when you enter, let's say you enter from the east side from the Rideau Trail and you get into the park, you see that big pond as you go towards campsite 1. And at one time, the road used to be basically where the pond is sort of in the pond. And because the Keller's Pond, like I say, expanded and flooded, we see it again at the back there.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is what you don't necessarily want to meet on a hike.
No, you don't want to meet this anymore.
So that was 35 years ago. Yeah.
Yes.
And we came out. Yes, I guess that's Inverary. Yeah. So thanks so much. So once again, so thank you, Jérôme, for excellent talk, and I hope at some time you'll be returned to give us another one. So that's thanks again. Yeah.
Well, I'm seriously thinking of doing what Chris did a few years ago when he took us to do the GPSing, trying to get a series of sort of walk in the park to have a look at some of these historical places.
Yes.
I've been thinking about it for a while, but I haven't done anything about it. If there's enough interest that maybe we can put something together.
Okay.
But it would have to be in the spring because the moment, like I said, everything starts growing, you can't see anything anymore.
Right. Oh, yes. I was fortunate enough back in 1993, I think it was, to be taken by Chris on some, well, but actually both historical hike and a historical canoe trip.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So that was kind of fun. Went in from Clear Lake Road one time, and I just can probably share that as well if you permit me again. To the walk down that and then into Little Clear Lake and so on. This is sharing, and see some of the dwellings. So this was, yeah. I can let you have all these pictures if you want, Jerome.
This is the
Yeah.
this is when the Black Lake farm had collapsed, the house, and there was still wood left in the foundation.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm just trying to get full screen view, but yes, yeah. Okay.
Did they remove the wood from that 1-2-story house? They took it all out of the park?
I would think either that or it all rotted away because it's not there anymore.
And then
It's stuff like the old cottages or the cottages that were there in some places, they just burnt them.
mhm.
Oh, this is an interesting pieces of wall. I'm not sure. Oh, that's the 1929
Yeah.
McComish barn.
Mhm.
And these things that we see there, I think the proper term is something like stanchion. That's where the neck of the cattle would go in, so that they would be inside when they were inside.
Ah, right, yes.
But now you always switch. Yeah, those things at the back there.
Mhm.
It's not there anymore. Everything rotted away.
Yeah, that's Chris talking. So yeah.
And this is
Sorry.
still there by the barn.
Oh, which is that?
There's
Sorry.
Chris.
Okay. Yes. And I can run down. We did also a canoe trip where they did look to go and do a run down between between Big Salmon and Little Salmon.
Yeah,
a lot
just
of
saw
rain.
that. So
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. I didn't dare to take my canoe down, but some of them did.
Yeah, there it is. I see our heart there, I think, and
Mhm.
Tom.
Yep.
And the
Yeah.
person at the front, I'm not sure. It could be Linda.
She was there, yeah. So some of these, there's Chris in the water, but you see that is
Yeah.
most of the time now just barely a trickle, and then it was running full spate. Yeah. So yeah.
Well,
hope you did
apparently, when he tested it one time, the water was very high, and the beavers had built a big dam just before this, and the MNR wanted to release some of the water, some of the pressure, and they decided it would be a good time to try to run the canoe and see if you could ship some logs ahead of you to see how
Oh,
it would
right.
go.
Yeah.
But quite a few years later, at one of the President's Paddle camp out at campsite 8, we did the other half. We went from Little Salmon Lake all the way to Birch Lake, and it was quite the trip.
Yes. Gosh.
Actually, it looked pretty much like this one, so I guess you must have gone there too.
Mhm. Yeah. There we are out on the lake again.
Yeah, it's only a spring run. You
Yes.
certainly would not want to do this in August.
Mhm.
I hope you did a tick check after that trip.
Oh, in those days, you didn't care about the ticks. There was no black-legged ticks in the park.
They are insane now.
Yeah, they are new. They came from our friends, the American. They came from the south.
You go. Right. So. So.
Not sure what you're doing in there, picking up some blueberries.
Oh
or
yes, that was
something.
blueberries. Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I was stopping, but that's blueberry, and then we did that's view down Big Salmon. I think this is.
Yeah, that used to be a
points.
lookout.
Yeah, yeah, and then yeah, wandering over the rocks. So it was a very good day. Yeah, and I think this is on Little Clear Lake. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm afraid that was before my time a bit.
Yeah, right. Well, I can share these. Yeah, we go.
This is basically not too far from campsite 6 at one of the cottages, something like the Fraser cottages or something.
All right. Yeah.
That one.
Oh, okay. Yes. I think this looks like it's in 6. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I'll stop there. But thanks very much again, Jerome. And just say,
Well, you're welcome.
yeah, we did have some thoughts about a lecture for next month, but we decided we would, given last year it was a very low attendance for our May lecture, we're going to have a summer break and resume in the fall with the monthly lectures. So but once again, thanks very much, Jerome, for an excellent talk and really interesting. And thanks everyone for joining us. And hope everybody has a great summer, has a chance to get out and enjoy the park. And we'll catch up again soon. So thanks. Thank you. Okay then.
Thank you so much.
Very good. Thanks then. I'll stop sharing and I'll close the meeting if that's okay. Thanks.
Au revoir.
Oh, one question.
Merci,
I see. Yeah, I see there. Where can we find the recording? What happens is that it goes on to the Friends YouTube channel once it goes on, comes off my computer and